He's saying my kingdom is made up of people. It's done without hands, which means no human intervention.
Wow.
It's not legalism at all,
Right.
but it's going to result in a changed heart in which the 10 Commandments are there. That harmonizes all these competing ideas that people get so mixed up on.
Yeah.
It's all him.
Wow, that's
Awesome.
deep. That's beautiful. That's deep. Hey everybody, welcome to LED Live. Is it a scary thing to think about standing in judgment before the King of the Universe?
Find out on this episode of LED Live.
So welcome back everybody. This is part of a series. We have our guest Scott Burgess with us. He's blessed us with the topic of marriage and to see the connection in Revelation. So welcome back on our show.
Good to be here.
And we're gonna get back into this topic a little bit here. This one is titled The Stand. What does that mean?
One of the key ideas in the book of Daniel, which is the companion to Revelation, is standing in the judgment. That word appears throughout the book. Every story has it.
I think that's kind of make me sweat a little bit.
But if we remember that the judgment is the wedding, then it's really about standing for our wedding.
That's right.
That's awesome.
That's right. That's awesome. So I'm excited to hear these connections and these parallels with this one as well.
So the question is, would you be scared if you had to go to court and your wife was the judge? Hopefully not. Right?
Yes, I would.
All right.
She knows all the secrets.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump in here. Just do a quick review of Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, the king has a dream, and in it, he sees. Well, first of all, he cannot recall the dream, but he knows it's important, so he wants to find out what is the dream and what does it mean. So he calls for Daniel, and Daniel tells him that there is a God in heaven that reveals secrets, and he makes known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. So we know this much. It has something to do with the latter days. But he also, we don't know what in the latter days. However, in verse 30 of the same chapter, not only does he say it's in the latter days, but he says it has to do with the thoughts of your heart. Okay. So the king is thinking about, how's my kingdom going to prosper? Is it going to continue? Is my name, we talk about a legacy these days. That's essentially what he's thinking about right there. So he's focused on what's going to happen in the future for this kingdom. Now, our focus is not on the whole dream, but just so we have something to set the stage. He sees this metal image, and on the metal image it has a head of gold, and he's told, that represents you, O king, your kingdom, Babylon. Then he keeps working his way down the image. He has the silver torso, that's Medo-Persia. We have brass for the thighs, the upper legs, and then the lower legs are iron, and that is Rome. Now, what's interesting, though, is why did God choose these particular metals? And it's interesting, if you look in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, we learn something that may not be obvious to everybody. 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. This is when David has been given the plans to build a house for the Lord. But he's told, you can't do it, your son will do it. But in those verses, it turns out we find these very metals. It says here that the rulers of the king's work offered willingly and gave for the service of the house of God gold a certain amount, silver a certain amount, brass, and even says iron. You may not have known iron was used in the sanctuary, but it was. And also, it says that there were precious stones that were used as well. So that tells us that right now, it's no accident he used these metals for the image. It actually is a very subtle, but it is a hint, a subtle hint, that this dream has something to do with the sanctuary.
Oh, that's interesting. I always thought the metals were a direct link to the kingdom because that's what was prevalent during that time.
God has, I don't know how he does it, but he has his sovereignty, I guess. But those kingdoms, yes, I mean, like if you look at the coinage that they used or the weapons, each of these metals, in fact, was characteristic of those kingdoms.
Yeah.
God somehow knew that, and that was true. But also, he says they have another significance. Instead of earthly kingdoms, they have something to do with the way he runs things.
Mhm.
So they're both there. So that's absolutely true.
It's so multi-layered. I just
Yeah.
love how God does that. It's like he kind of has these just things underneath the surface and keep going, and it's like I think that's why when we study the Bible in heaven's future, we will forever be blown away at like, whoa, this is crazy. Look at this parallel, and be sharing back and forth.
So this is something Mikey showed me because it's similar in Hosea 13, because in Daniel 7, you also have the different beasts, right? So in Hosea 13, starting in verse 7, it says, "So I will be to them," this is God speaking, "like a lion. Like a leopard by the road I will lurk. I will meet them like a bear deprived of her cubs. I will tear open their ribcage, and there I will devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them."
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
you have
Yeah, the four beasts.
4 beasts there that are the same as they are in Daniel chapter 7, which is fascinating. Again, God is using them to describe his characteristics, but they're also used for earthly kingdoms.
We should have wore our four beasts shirt.
Oh, I know.
Here's a
Who was
plug for
wearing
that.
that one?
I
We
can't
can
wait
put it
for
up on
a
the
Bible
show.
study with Jesus, man. It's
I
gonna be
know.
like,
Wouldn't it be crazy?
did you notice
over again.
this?
Yeah, if he
Yes,
actually
yeah.
sits down and goes, when you look at this part, look at it over here. It'd be wild.
It's amazing because we have trouble just connecting things in a line, but God has he can have so many different things come together and merge and everything. That's how could anyone do that?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then again, we're not God.
Yeah,
So.
it's like the prediction, or I guess you wouldn't call it a prediction, but the prophecies of Jesus coming about, right? It wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, it was like thousands, wasn't it? I mean, the likelihood of those probabilities coming together is just, I think I remember seeing it was like one with like 17 zeros after it or something. It was just insane.
There's no way it could happen
Yeah.
by chance. That's right. All right. So the king's dream, in order to understand it properly, we've got to have in view that temple that was built, Solomon's temple. And that is, in fact, that was a model of God's heavenly temple. So with that mindset, then we can go ahead and see what the lesson is for today. There were those 4 metals that came in the image. But then it also said there was a stone that hit it. And remember, it mentioned something about stones there in that list in 2 Chronicles. Our focus is going to be on this stone right here. So when Daniel goes on in verses 34 and 35 of Daniel 2, he says, talking to the king, "You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay and broke them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." So that it's not just the image, the stone that does away with the image. There's something very significant about that, but what?
Yeah.
So that's the intriguing thing. We want to explore that a little bit. So what does the stone represent? A lot of times, if you ask people, if they're Christians anyways, they'll say the stone represents what?
Jesus.
God's kingdom.
God's kingdom.
Now, just pretend that go back to your pre-Christian days and you don't already know Christian lingo and certain symbols and everything. Can you see how somebody might scratch their head and say, wait a minute, there's this rock that hit an image and you're telling me it's Jesus? It doesn't say it's a person. What? I mean, what's the connection there? So what we need to do first is, I agree that Jesus is the rock of ages. But if we just let the text explain itself, in Daniel's explanation, down in verse 44 of the same chapter, he's explaining each of the metals, and then right where he needs to talk about the stone, he says God will establish a kingdom, which will not be destroyed. It will stand forever. Now, we'll explore the connection between king and the kingdom, but for right now, yeah, the primary thing that's in view is that the stone is actually God's kingdom. That's the focus. Now, a good question is, if we had a statue, an image that was all of metals, why does God change it when he talks about his own kingdom? Why did he switch it and now it's a stone? Why didn't he just come up with some new metal just to kind of keep that same motif going?
I like how it's set apart, like nothing you've ever seen, nothing that was ever established before. It's like this external thing that comes and changes everything.
Right? It does make a distinction anyways, though. I mean, because you have one type of material versus 4 others. So right there's at least a difference, but if we could establish more precisely why.
You don't use really any of the other materials to build a foundation.
Okay. That's actually interesting because if you look
That
at
is
the
weird.
foundations of the holy city, or at least of the wall of the city, it says that those are all various like precious stones. That's exactly right.
Yeah. But yeah,
Well,
you don't
maybe
build a
not in this
foundation on
country,
gold. You
but-
don't build one on silver. You don't build one on bronze. You don't really build a foundation with iron. You might use it for the structural part, but you don't build a foundation with that. You know, the Bible says a wise man built his house upon a rock. That was the foundation. That's going to keep you stable.
That much is true. Yep. Okay. Well, all right. So we're looking at the question: why is it represented as a stone? To understand it, let's just go to the scriptures and see if there's some clues right there. And one I think is a very handy place to look at is in Ezekiel chapter 28. So why don't we take a look over here in Ezekiel 28. And this gives us a little bit of history here before this world existed. It tells us how things were in heaven right there. And before we look at that, just bear in mind, Daniel 2:35, we're just reminding ourselves, it was a stone, smote the image, and it says it became a great mountain. We're going to find those two key words here in Ezekiel 28. And yeah, we'll look here at verses 14 through 16. So I don't know, Kendi, did you want to read those?
Sure. Ezekiel 28, verses 14 through 16. You are the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set you so. You were upon the holy mountain of God. You have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created, till iniquity was found in you. By the multitude of your merchandise, they have filled the midst of you with violence, and you have sinned. Therefore, I will cast you as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire.
Okay. So you notice right there we have stones as well as a mountain. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think this is actually to inform our understanding, because we have a stone that strikes a metal image, and it does mention that it has something to do with a mountain. And, you know, when does a stone become a mountain? But here it's very plain that, well, there's a mountain God has that's characterized by these stones of fire. So it sounds like maybe this has something to do with it. One thought I came across, there's an old article I read here. It's in a publication. It was called Review and Herald. And this interesting statement was made. It says that the vacancies that were made in heaven by the fall of Satan and his angels will be filled by the redeemed of the Lord. The vacancies that were, Satan and the angels that walked among these stones of fire on that mountain, they were cast out. So now there's an emptiness. So now God's going to fill it with his people. And so, yeah, we're privileged to occupy the very vacancies that were left there on God's mountain among the fiery stones.
I think it's fairly interesting when you look at how the Bible describes fire and the things that are associated with that fire. And yet in much of Christendom, it's like a fearful thing, like fire is hell and this and that. But yet when you really look at it, like, Jesus is on fire. His feet are on fire. His eyes will look like they're on fire.
That's right.
We will walk amongst the fiery stones, and so, I can see how the devil just takes that concept and flips it upside down on its head and makes it a fearful thing rather than how the Bible describes it.
I guess
The destruction by fire comes out of heaven.
Right.
In the end times, it says that he'll bring fire from God out of heaven and destroy the wicked. And same thing with like Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff that fell from heaven.
But it's almost like also if you stood in the presence of God, you would immediately burn up because of our sinfulness, right? But if we are translated to heaven and given new bodies and we no longer have that sin a part of us, you can stand in the presence of God and you will not burn up. So
Fireproof.
that fire coming from heaven really is consuming because of the sinful nature of those that are in front of it.
It's interesting because it actually asks a question in the Bible in Isaiah, I think it's chapter 33, and it says, who can dwell with the everlasting burning? Is not the wicked, but the popular conception of an eternal place of torment. Rather, it says it's those who have clean hands. It's the righteous.
That's right.
And the angels that are right there, like that word seraphim in the Bible, it means the burning ones.
Whoa.
They're in God's presence, but they're not being consumed. They're free of sin. They're
So
perfect.
Describe that. Why is it called the fiery ones?
Well,
seraphim.
because God himself is a consuming fire, right?
Right.
Yep.
And those
That's
who are in his
Hebrews.
immediate presence, they're going to be just in the
Burning.
presence of fire.
Yeah, interesting.
So they are burning. Yeah.
I wonder if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was some kind of parallel to that. Like, I can make them worthy to stand in fire.
right.
Kind of a glimpse of what's to come. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it says when they came out, there wasn't even the smell of smoke.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't go to your fireplace with a little puny fire.
Right,
You're going to
right.
at least have smoke in your hands.
Right.
And if it's a big one, you're going to have smoke all over you.
Nebuchadnezzar was convinced.
What's fascinating to me though, too, is so if you can't stand in the presence of God without being pure, without being consumed. Because if you hold on to your sin, you're going to be consumed with your sin. And yet, it's fire that also purifies us, right?
Burns it off.
So yeah, it burns it off. So it's almost like, well, what's the difference? I think the difference is whether you're holding on or letting go. You know, if you're holding on, you're consumed with the sin. If you let go and say, yes, purify me, then God burns that away, and then you're pure. And as pure, and only by His grace, you're able to stand.
Good point.
Yeah, because Paul says, it's, fire will try everything to see of what sort it is. If it's wood, hay, and stubble, it gets burned up. But if it's, like, say, stone, that will last.
It speaks to how small-minded we can be if we read the Bible with our own eyes and our own worldview. That's why it's so important to pray before you read, have the Holy Spirit guide you, and be intentional as you read. Look at those key words and things like that. Have you guys ever seen colored fire? People
Yes.
yeah, it's incredible.
Oh, you mean where they actually add some different chemicals to it? You'd probably know as a chemist.
You actually, that's what they do with fireworks. You add different metals, and different metals will burn different colors. So, for example, if you want that blue-green look, you're going to put some kind of copper, compound in, or iron is going to be more of your like brownish reds.
It kind of changed my whole view of not only God, but heaven. Heaven is a colorful, beautiful place. So I'm actually not picturing red everywhere, or things like breaking apart. It's probably really colorful and different colors of fire. Probably. I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Is there any connection here where the Ten Commandments were written in stone and He puts them in your heart?
I think you're jumping ahead. I think I know exactly where he's going with this.
Is that part of it?
I think there's a connection here. I think I know where he's
Okay.
going.
Okay, well, so getting back to this right here, there's vacancies on God's mountain along the fire stones, and we are going to become a stone kingdom that is cut out of that very mountain. So we're going to fill the vacancy there. Okay, and the kingdom is going to stand forever, stone, that's fitting, right? Stone.
A diamond is forever.
That's right.
There you go. Okay.
Says
Okay. Now, that stone, though, it's cut out of God's mountain in heaven. So here's a question. What is God's mountain? Can you identify it? Is there a particular mountain?
Zion.
Sinai?
Well, Sinai is on earth,
yeah.
but Zion,
Zion.
Psalm 48 is one place. It talks about Mount Zion on the sides of the north is the city of the great king. That is His mountain. That's right. But there is another mountain that's called God's mountain, and you already got it.
Sinai.
Yeah, Sinai. Yep. If you
So Mount Zion is in heaven?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Exodus 3:1, as the book of Exodus opens, it talks about once Moses has become a shepherd, he's fled from Pharaoh. And it says that he came to the mountain of God, Horeb. But that's the same thing as Sinai. So there's a connection between those two mountains there. Now, what's the main thing that happened at Mount Sinai? What do we think of?
The Ten Commandments were given.
Ten Commandments, that's right. Yep. God spoke all these words, and then the Ten Commandments follow. And, of course, the obvious question, what were the Ten Commandments written on?
Sapphire stone.
They were written on stone, that's right.
Sapphire, right?
Well, we'll see.
Fire. The word fire is in there. Fiery stones.
Okay.
Look it up in your It's Sapphire.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's
Gotta
interesting you
connect the
say that.
dots.
Yeah.
you just made it. Made it up.
No.
No.
Oh.
No.
Yeah.
No, we can. I think we can prove that pretty strongly.
After God had given the Ten Commandments, He told Moses, "Come up to me into the mount. I will give you tables of stone and the law and commandments which I have written." Okay. But that's verse 12. The interesting question to explore is, where did the stone tablets come from? I mean, did God just sort of reach down and say, "Oh, here's a rock over here. I'll just..."
Moses brought the stones, right? The first time? I know he brought them the second time.
Second time.
Time.
So he did not bring them the first time.
Correct.
Okay, so I always wondered that. when he breaks them the first time, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I need some huge stones, like where did he get them from? I mean, they're not just simply laying around.
No.
What about, I'm looking at Exodus 34:4, it says, and he hewn 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and Moses rose up early in the morning and went up unto Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and he took in his hands the 2 tables of stone.
That's the second time, after Moses had
he
broken
made
them.
Oh, we're talking
like
about
the
the first
first ones.
time.
And
we're
the
talking about
second
the first
set,
ones.
yeah, Moses had to bring them. God still wrote with his finger on the second set,
Yeah.
it says in Deuteronomy. But on the first set, God provided the stone and he wrote on it.
See, they got that wrong in that Exodus movie.
That's right.
They said Moses brought the stones.
Hollywood is not a good source to go for,
Biblical.
no. Yeah, so where did the stone tables come from?
Heaven?
The Bible actually tells us. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh,
the
interesting.
immediate context, yeah. So it sounds like you probably have an idea there.
Yeah, I actually preached a sermon like years ago, probably in my mid-20s, called Stones of Fire.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's pretty easily provable between Ezekiel and Exodus what the stones are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you go back 2 verses here in Exodus 24, it mentions something, and it can't mean anything except exactly what it says. It says that the people saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in its clearness.
Now, it corrects me if I'm wrong, but in Jewish culture, when they would actually add a hem of blue around the base of the priest's garment,
Right.
it was really to signify the law, right, being interwoven into the very fabric of the priest's outfit.
And just to make the connection, yeah, sapphire generally blue, so yes, yeah.
What are the other colors? Purple and scarlet? Gold? Like, that's in Revelation, it talks about this false church that has all the colors but blue, the lawless one. So they look like the church, but they're missing the blue.
Actually, it's very interesting. Revelation 17 there, yeah, she's dressed as a high priest.
purple and scarlet.
And
just the
scarlet
gold and
being-
precious
She's
stones.
missing white, no purity. She's missing the blue for the faithful.
Which would
law.
ultimately leave you with red.
Well,
Purple
purple
and scarlet.
yeah,
and
purple
gold
scarlet.
and precious stones, all that stuff. Just like his outfit.
Now, I don't know if you're going to go over this, but I know Ezekiel, when it talks about giving him all the precious stones, it's speaking of Lucifer, right? So it's talking about covering him with the stones. And he had the stones that are mentioned on the priest's outfit as well, but he's missing a few of them.
Yeah, he was similar. The best I can understand it, since he was the highest created being, it seems like perhaps he was maybe you could say like the right-hand man while he was faithful to the high priest, but he was not the high priest. And it was similar but not identical. Yeah, that's right. Well, so he's gotten those sapphire stones there, but now this is the question here. He's written them on sapphire stone. But where do you get sapphire stone from? Because I mean, if mountains had sapphire on them, all the robbers in the world long ago would have figured that out and rounded up all the sapphire, right?
Yeah.
So where did God find sapphire? Did he just happen to find, Sinai is a good mountain because it has sapphire in it?
So in his mountain,
Yeah.
the mountain.
Wasn't it underneath his throne, or as proceeding out of the throne looked like a pathway of sapphire stone?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, it sounds like you were.
Yeah, I was going to say there is that connection in Ezekiel. I mean, it's. I think some of this is about perspective. You know, the people are given the perspective from the ground, looking up, right? So when you go back to that verse, it was. Do you have it?
Exodus 24:10.
24:10, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet. So they're looking up, and they're saying, "What's under God's feet?" It's not necessarily that they're looking at the mountain, right? Yes, God is on the mountain, but they're not looking. It's not that the mountain itself is made of sapphire, like he's saying. So they're looking up. You get a similar perspective from Ezekiel.
Yeah. That's right. And there's an assumption a lot of people make here too. But yeah, in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26, Ezekiel, at the beginning of his book, he gets a glimpse of Jesus, and he says that he sees this likeness of a throne as the appearance of a sapphire stone. That's where you have that exact same phrase used again. And that's the only place you're going to find it. So it's evident that, it actually comes from God's throne. That's where it gets it from. It didn't say, when it said it's under his feet, did it say that God was standing on the mountain? It didn't say that. But it did say it's under his feet. How could it be under his feet on the mountain and he's not standing? What's the other?
He's sitting on the mountain?
He's sitting on the throne.
So
Yes.
it's like his footstool.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it makes sense because then you think, oh, he gave the 10 Commandments the basis of judgment. Wouldn't he be seated as he would one day as the final judge? Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's where the stone comes from right there. So what we want to note at this point is that the 10 Commandments are written on sapphire stone from the foundation of his throne. But it says in the Bible that the foundation of his throne is righteousness and judgment. It's true in a literal way. It's like at the base of the throne there is literally the 10 Commandments. So it's
Mercy
true
and
literally
grace.
as well as a figure of speech.
Mercy and grace.
Well, that's true. They meet there. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Okay. Oh, there it is, right. Psalms 97, verse 2. Righteousness and judgment are the foundation of your throne. Yeah, so it's not just a figure of speech. It is actually literally true. And in the sanctuary, like the Mosaic one, they'd have the ark, the mercy seats on top. That's where the God's presence would be. And then within it was the 10 Commandments. And so that's the
mercy seat.
foundation. Yeah, that's where his feet would rest, as it were. So
It's interesting how God is so literal but like figurative, or like so metaphoric but yet so practical. You know what I mean?
exactly. I mean, because he can use things, and we might just read it like the first time somebody read the Bible, they would read a statement like Psalm 97, verse 2, and they're just saying, okay, it's just telling me that he's got a government that's just and righteous. That makes sense. But then I guess God knows that we're easily confused. He says, but don't miss what it literally says. It's just literally true, and when we get there, we'll say, oh, it really is just exactly like that.
I am, and I think a lot of people are, visual people. So it's almost like a monument to recognize every time you see it. Oh yeah, his foundation is based on his law and all this stuff.
Right. So what we set up here is that, the 10 Commandments are the foundation of his kingdom. Okay. If we consider also what the Bible says more about the 10 Commandments, in Exodus 34:28, this one tells us that they are, in fact, the words of the covenant.
Which is marriage language.
That's exactly right.
We talked about that in the last episode that we did with you. I mean, this is the marriage language. The covenant is that relationship, and the document, the covenant. I mean, the Bible is also spoken to as the covenant.
And interesting, when it's written in stone, that indicates that it's forever. But if it's the basis of his marriage covenant, then he says, my marriage is forever. Here are the terms. If you agree to that, you let me change into it, it's going to be this way for eternity. So
40 days and 40 nights again as well.
it talks about God who keeps covenant and mercy with them that love him, because it is a marriage relationship right there. We referred to Malachi chapter 2 in our last talk, that God, he hates divorce because he wants permanent marriage. Okay. So yes, the 10 Commandments, those are the basis of his marriage covenant. So we think of the law sometimes as like this, it doesn't seem pleasant. You better do this, and if not, there's punishment. But we're looking at the wrong way. Sure, there are consequences, but God says you don't have to have those if you're willing to marry me. So
I have a tendency to speed in my car all the time. If a car just had 2 speeds, go and stop, I'd be happy, right? And I don't know why, but it is difficult for me to want to drive 35 miles an hour through the town, right? To me, that just seems like so slow. I can't do it, right? Okay. I saw a sign the other day that said, "Drive as if your kids were in our neighborhood."
There you go.
And it was really interesting because I have kids, and all of a sudden it changed the context of that. And I think the same thing is true to the 10 Commandments. You can look at them like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. Or you can look at them like, you know what? I wouldn't cheat on my bride. I wouldn't lie to her. I wouldn't steal from her or anything like this. And it changes the context of how we actually have a relationship with those 10 Commandments, and stop looking at them as this fearful thing, but as a beautiful thing.
What about if the 10 Commandments is nailed on the cross and we cannot keep it anymore? So we're under grace.
Then there is no marriage covenant. And by the way, when people talk about that, they're using grace in the sense of mercy. Grace in the Bible is the ability God gives to keep it. If we're saying that he's done away with it, it's like saying that we can't keep it. That's not grace.
So when you say mercy and grace, a lot of times people think it's basically saying mercy and mercy.
Yeah.
But it's really
They use them synonymously. They're
empowerment
two different things.
and
Yeah.
Help you
mercy.
to keep it. Yeah.
That's right.
And
So I have to
what,
try that.
back to what you were saying, Scotty, it takes you back to that golden rule: treat others as you would be treated. So, do you want to be cheated on? Do you want people to steal from you?
There you go.
Yeah, don't do it to other people.
It's an excellent way to look at things. Yep. Okay, so now, what is on God's mountain? Well, it turns out there's many places. We identify that God's sanctuary is right there. Psalm 20 says, "Send help from the sanctuary, strengthen you out of Mount Zion." So the sanctuary is right there. We saw earlier in Ezekiel 28 that yes, there are stones of fire there in the holy mountain. Maybe there's stones of fire in God's sanctuary. Yeah. We know that the foundations of the wall around the city has those stones that are very similar to the ones, a little bit different arrangement, but the ones on the high priest's breastplate and everything. Yeah.
You know, in Ezekiel 28, verse 14, it talks about, once again, that section that's talking about Lucifer. It says, "You are the anointed cherub that covereth," right? And you think of the 10 Commandments is inside of the ark with the 2 cherub over that, protecting the law of God. I mean, that was what Lucifer's job was in heaven. Was he was the protector, or the let me tell you what God's character is really like. And that's why when he went to everybody else in the universe and went, you know what, God's really not like that. In fact, he's kind of this mean guy. Well, you're going to believe the guy that's his job to tell you how he is, you know. And so that's why he was able to be so effective with winning so many people over to his side.
What if the Ark of the Covenant just has one cherub on it now? That'd be wild, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Someone took his place, right?
Probably.
Right.
Michael? Well, Michael is Jesus.
It would be
Gabriel.
Gabriel, yes. Gabriel.
That's right. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he's on that mercy seat. It's the atonement cover is the best translation right there. So if you're a covering cherub, that means you're right there on the atonement cover. At one point, Lucifer was at one with God. And how sad that the very closest of all the beings in the universe fell away. He chose not to remain surrendered.
I wonder if Judas was kind of like a parallel of Lucifer or something, you know? He was right there with Jesus all the time
Oh yeah.
until they turned on him.
What is going on in the heavenly sanctuary in the latter days? What's taking place?
Jesus is interceding for us.
Okay. Yep.
Hebrews.
He's our high priest, like we talked about in the wedding.
He's been interceding ever since he went to heaven. You know, right after 40 days after his resurrection. But then a special work goes on in the very end of time, where it moves to that work of judgment. And so we have that going on right there. The Day of Atonement or the judgment, that's true. Daniel 8:14 tells us when that started. You can narrow that down to a date right there. But in Leviticus 16, it goes over the whole process of how God cleanses the sanctuary. And that's the Day of Atonement right there. We saw in Matthew 22 that the wedding, which is the same thing as the Day of Atonement, it's an investigation, so it's a judgment. The parable of the 10 virgins, again, wedding and judgment go hand in hand right there. What you can conclude, though, is really interesting. If the judgment is taking place in that heavenly sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies right there, it's the wedding chamber. It's where it goes. It's where the vows are exchanged, and it's like that inner apartment. It's the. I mean, I guess you could say, just to use a word so we can understand, it's like the bedroom. It's the most intimate place.
I remember hearing a sermon from Dwayne Lemon one time that he talked about these parallels between the high priest and the man in the marriage. And the only one that's allowed to see within the inner veil, is the high priest, the male figure. And I just read, it's like, wow, that's crazy that even on a physical level, whether you believe in God or not, it's like we are playing these many little roles that illustrate these deeper spiritual truths.
Yeah, because even an atheist wants his wife to be just for him.
That's right.
Sure.
And it's like how God witnesses through nature, through things that we experience every day. And if that atheist ever opened their heart to God, God could use that as an illustration. You know how you love your wife? You know how you only want her to be with you? That's how I am,
But the sanctuary being that intimate connection that we're able to have with God, right? Like our bodies are like the sanctuary, right? We have the Shekinah glory where He is supposed to be dwelling. We have the sort of the most holy place, even in this illustration of the human body. Right. And so this is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and we mentioned in our last time that the final judgment being the wedding, it is at one-ment. Atonement is at one-ment, but like one flesh. So really all these things come together. It makes a lot of sense. We pointed out before, what is the basis of the judgment? What is God's standard?
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments, right? And he judges our lives to see, are they in harmony or are they not in harmony with it? And the verse is right there in the last two verses of Ecclesiastes. It talks about that we are to keep his commandments. That's the whole conclusion of the whole matter. And he's going to bring every work into judgment. We're to keep the marriage covenant because that's what he's evaluating right now in the courtship. So the 10 Commandments, they're written in stone, showing us that the marriage contract is permanent. You know, and that you've got the stone that hits that image right there. The image shatters because none of the earthly kingdoms, however they've gotten themselves into power, it's all by man's methods, and so nothing lasts. But he says you got to have a foundation. If you've got this foundation, the 10 Commandments, my character, that's the one that's going to last forever. And it's interesting that he strikes it on the feet because that is its foundation. He says that's clay and iron, that's got to go. But this is just poof. Okay, now, obvious question. Who is the judge during the judgment?
Jesus.
Jesus, that's exactly right. What we can learn about Jesus, we've seen that he's the Son of Man. And we learned that, the Son of Man, it's also the bridegroom. So we know that much. But in the Day of Atonement, he's the high priest. And if you look at how the high priest, if you look at his outfit, which is ornamented, notice how it's described. In Exodus 28, he's got 2 onyx stones on his shoulders. The Bible also says that he has this breast piece right here. And he has 12 stones right there, 4 rows of 3 each. And he also has the Urim and the Thummim right there. So he's got all these stones right there. And that's fascinating. So, like the Bible, the government is on his shoulder, Isaiah 9, verse 6.
And weren't the stones kind of a representation of the tribes of Israel as well? That they were actually on his heart, and that's
exactly
why
right.
it was on the breastplate.
That is exactly right. It's interesting because the Bible says that he is going to give us a new name. It's like he's got the names recorded right there, but he's going to give us a name, and he's got the names
on his heart.
Yeah. So,
which is like you just think you see this relationship through and through and through. You know, when you're falling in love with somebody, you write little things to them. You have them constantly on your mind, on your heart. It's like everything you do is a remembrance. You know, you have articles and things that make you just think of that person. So
it shows the intimacy right there. He has the names written here, and he has the names written right here, but it does show that union right there on the heart. Yep. This is what's really fabulous. The names are on those stones, which kind of suggests that God regards his people like as some sort of stone. But Peter is very explicit. In 1 Peter 2, he says that we are to come to him as a living stone. And he lays in Zion a chief cornerstone, who is the stone right here. So the stone can Jesus' kingdom, as we said earlier, but also the king himself. That's consistent because Daniel 2 talks about kings and kingdoms are interchangeable. So if his kingdom is a stone kingdom, it makes sense that he is the stone king.
Also, Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold," but Babylon was still there even after Nebuchadnezzar died. So.
Right, and then it says like another kingdom will arise after you. So it's like, we switch from a king to a kingdom because they're synonymous. And it does that again in Daniel 7 and 8 where he uses the two synonymously. But if God has a stone kingdom and he is the stone king, what would it make sense to call the subjects of his kingdom?
Mini stones?
Yeah, we ought to be like just teeny stones. But it's funny, he talks about us as living stones. In the same passage, he says, you also as living stones. And see, I used to not understand. I thought, what is stone? What's he talking about? But he's talking about the temple is made of stones. And we occupy a place in it. We're called like pillars and everything. We're going to make up that. There's a physical structure, but we make up the temple. We're the occupants of the temple. There's a kingdom that's like a government, but then there are those who live in the kingdom. There's a temple, and there's who live in the temple. So we are stones. We're living stones, though, not dead rocks. Now, how does a stone become a living stone? There's a question. Stones aren't alive, right? How do you become a living stone?
Fire.
Fire.
Well, actually, sort of, yeah.
I think about how God will change your heart of stone to a heart of flesh, but is that
the other way around.
Well, no, it's still not a living stone. It's something living, though.
Yeah. It turns out there's a key. It said that the stone was cut out of the mountain, but it also said something else. It was cut out of the mountain
Without hands.
without hands. That is hugely important. Because that phrase is used somewhere else in the Bible, and then it suddenly all makes total sense.
Yeah, it's used when well, I don't know if it's used there, but the same imagery is on in Exodus when God is giving the commandments to Moses. You think, because that's a stone that's been, it's not cut out with hands.
It came out of God's
That same
mountain.
imagery. So it probably doesn't say it, but the idea is there.
I know where it is.
Where is
It's
that?
when Jesus died on the cross and the sanctuary, the veil,
You're right.
he was ripped with
Not human hands.
Yeah.
no human hands.
Yeah, it was actually God himself that did it. That's interesting. That does relate. We won't talk about it today, but that is absolutely true because we can take it a step further, but we won't today. But yes, that's very interesting there. But probably the most, the clearest, the most pertinent is this. In Ezekiel, it does say, "A new heart I'm going to give you," and he says, "I'm going to remove the stony heart. I'm going to give you a heart of flesh, one that's one with my flesh." But ironically, we'll have the words that are written in stone on your heart. That's true. But notice he says, "I do it by my Spirit." But the Spirit has something to do without hands as well.
I just go back to that verse
Sure.
real quick, because this is a verse that we've actually used quite a few times in our ministries, describing whenever we're kind of getting to the bottom of the Ten Commandments, and you know, the argument really is that we hear a lot is like, oh, you legalists, you're putting all this, you know, like emphasis on the Ten Commandments, but I really want to point this emphasis out in this, that it is God's Spirit that is put inside of us, and it is God that makes us walk in His ordinances. And it is Him that helps us to keep the judgments and to actually do them. It is not us. And so even though we are talking about the Ten Commandments and the importance of it and the significance of it, it still goes back all the way to it isn't us. We're not the ones doing this. It is literally God's Spirit that's inside of us that's doing it.
That's exactly what you see in the covenant too. Because a covenant's made, God and Abraham, they make a covenant. Abraham's essentially asleep when God is fulfilling his end of the bargain. So then the question is, well, then how does Abraham keep the covenant? And if you look at his descendants, break it, right? Until Jesus comes as the Son of Man, right? And then he keeps man's end of the covenant. So really it's God on both ends saying, I know you can't do it. I'm going to do it for you.
And there's something, so if we go to things with the wedding mindset again, we can come to a helpful understanding. Legalism is when you're trying to earn God's favor. You're going to sort of climb into heaven. If I just do it well enough, I can please Him. He says that'll never do it because in your own strength, you can't keep it perfectly. There's no way. But in the wedding relationship, He's the bridegroom, we're the bride. But what is a bride called to do in Scripture?
Be a helper.
Well, yeah, we are to be like a help meet, someone suitable for Him. That's true. But we're called to submit as unto the Lord. I mean, it doesn't mean to do everything if your husband's telling you to do something that's filthy or something. But that is the bride's role, is to submit. We're all part of the bride in relation to Christ. So wait a minute, it's not about me working hard, it's about me surrendering. It's like stopping working. Saying, okay, you take the reins and you do it to me because I've just got it all messed up.
Now, isn't that interesting? Just that thought alone, that really, submitting to the Ten Commandments, where people would be like, "You legalist, you're working your way to heaven." No, I'm actually letting go and letting God.
Right.
And I've shared it a bunch of times, so you guys have heard it over and over, but that's how I got freed from addiction. I was trying in my own strength. I'm not going to smoke today. I'm not going to drink today. Fell every time. And then I finally reached a point where I was like, I can't do it, God. You got to take it. I give you permission. Take it out of my life. Woke up the next day without a single withdrawal, and I haven't gone back ever since. That's right. That was supernatural.
That's right.
And it's interesting because that's the word forgive. Actually, it refers to removal. It's not just like, okay, it was a boo-boo. I'll pretend it didn't happen. He says, I'm happy. He's the sin bearer, right? He says, give it to me. I am going to forgive it. I'm going to remove it, put it in the trash dump, and you don't have that in your life anymore. That's when we know we got real forgiveness.
Amen.
Yeah. But again, that's Him. It's not us taking it to the garbage dump. It's calling the trash man. Here, please. He says, I'm only too happy to do it.
And when I tell people how it happened for me, I say it's all Him. I tried. I failed every time.
What are you talking about in the verse in Ezekiel? It says new spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when Jesus is talking with
Nicodemus. Yeah.
and he said, you cannot see new things. I mean, you need to be born with the spirit.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, I don't know if it's connected, with
Sure
the
it
Ten
is.
Commandments and new spirit, and we need to be born again.
Yeah.
Through spirit.
That's exactly
Not just
right.
Water.
Yeah. So yeah, God is going to lead his bride to become one flesh with him. He's going to lead her to be faithful to the marriage covenant. It's not like she's going to try. I mean, it's just he's going to lead her to do that. He gets all the credit there. Now, I said that it was cut out without hands. How does the Holy Spirit change our hearts? It's something he does to our hearts without hands. And Paul says so. Can you think of an operation that he does on our heart?
I don't know.
It's an everlasting covenant.
Oh, an everlasting covenant, yeah.
Circumcision is that by the heart, by the Spirit, right?
Interesting.
Oh, by the way, circumcision was also called the everlasting covenant.
Yeah.
Ooh, but it was really meant to be on the heart. The other area was a symbol, but the real significance is the heart. But notice this, Colossians 2:11. You are circumcised with the circumcision made.
Without hands.
There it is right there.
Whoa.
He's saying my kingdom is made up of people. It's done without hands, which means no human intervention.
Wow.
It's not legalism at all,
Right.
but it's going to result in a changed heart in which the Ten Commandments are there. That harmonizes all these competing ideas that people get so mixed up on.
Yeah.
It's all him.
Wow, that's deep.
awesome.
That's beautiful. That's deep. Interesting.
Yeah.
We're just fighting each other with the
Yeah.
Christian dumb.
But-
You say like legalizing all sounds like.
But I think I don't want to hammer this till it's a dead horse, but the very idea that it's like, no, it has nothing to do with the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments are nothing. It's like literally going, well, that's the covenant that God gave for his bride, you know what I mean? And everybody wants to throw it out the window and do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And whatever you do, God's just going to forgive you anyway, every single time. You try that in your marriage, you won't be married very long.
I think it's ironic that Christians will, riot in the streets or whatever, don't tear down the Ten Commandments, and then in the same breath, oh, we don't got to keep it.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Whoa,
That's
what?
an interesting thought.
Yeah. It is. But when you look at the biblical framework, you don't have these obvious inconsistencies. Everything makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that is something that is really beautiful, I think. I mean, that just really illustrates a very foundational, deep level of, wow, it's still God and his Spirit that is doing that inside of us.
And there's one other thing here. This is the most important thing. It's done without hands. But even when man was called to do it as a symbol before Jesus came, it says like here that Zipporah used a flint stone to do it. So even there, it's all these things keep coming together.
Now, isn't a flint stone something that starts a fire?
Oh, fiery stone.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that.
Interesting.
You just picked that up.
I know that it's very sharp, but yeah, okay, well, there you go.
Wow.
Okay, so to put it all together, the foundation of God's kingdom. His kingdom is a stone kingdom cut out of his mountain, Mount Zion, without hands, right? We know that the Ten Commandments were engraved, by the way, not on a rock. We have this idea that, we see some sort of rock hurtling through space.
Right.
No. It's a gemstone.
Right.
It's a precious stone, one that reflects light. It's beautiful.
Right.
So don't think of gravel in your driveway. This is wrong. It's not a boulder. It's whatever heavenly sapphire is infinitely better than our sapphire, but that's a much better approximation of sapphire.
And that original copy was not cut out with hands.
And man had nothing to do with it. It was God did it, however he does
I
that.
wonder, it's like just a thought. There's a pathway that leads out of the throne of God, and maybe it's like stones or whatever like this. Can you just see God like chiseling up one of the stones and then going, I'm gonna use this one right here that's in this pathway. I don't know, just a funny thought.
It's fascinating though. So and then he writes them on the tables of our heart by the Holy Spirit, who circumcises our heart without hands. So it just kind of goes down like this. But then also when you look at Jesus, because there's his kingdom, or there's his kingdom. Now we look at the king. Well, let's see. He's the chief cornerstone, the foundation of the temple. He circumcises our heart with the flintstone, which is, it's amazing. Hollywood cheapens things. We think of some silly cartoon.
Yeah.
No, to God, flintstone is something he uses to say, I'm going to make your heart. It's precious. So he uses the Holy Spirit there. He removes our stony heart. We become a living stone then. We receive a heart of flesh so that we become one flesh with him. I used to wonder about that. Why does he give us a heart of flesh? Doesn't Paul use flesh in a bad way? Well, he does, but he's not talking about that kind here. He's saying my nature, that good flesh, the only good flesh there is. It results in a bride who's faithful to the marriage covenant, which is the 10 Commandments written in stone. And so those are the things that I have seen. To me, I just find this is awe-inspiring.
Yeah, man. I love how you really connected the dots there. So what is the final conclusion of this stone that grows into a mountain and takes up the whole earth?
It's going to be the only kingdom that's going to last forever. God's kingdom is going to be on this earth. It talks about the holy city will come down on the earth. And he's going to remake it. It's going to be the new earth. It's be the one that's going to last forever. And it's going to be made out of people who have surrendered every last thing. Surrendered fully as a bride, who said, I'm not holding on to one thing. You just take every bit of my heart. They're going to be filled with this Spirit. Not, I've got a little bit of the residue, the garbage in there. It's going to be totally empty, so it's going to be filled. And then it'll be the fiery, beautiful gemstone kingdom, and the whole universe will be looking on thinking, wow, he took something that was so fouled by sin, and he remade it. Only God could do this. It'll be like the spectacle for the ages.
Can I just imagine like a mountain? Like, God's ways are so much higher than our ways, right? Have you ever been on the top of a really, really high mountain, ever? I climbed
What's really high?
Yeah, I climbed Mount Shasta in high school. That was about the highest that I'd been. And when you're on there, I mean, it's just like, whoa, right? Nobody, I think, gets to the top of the mountain and be like, nah, this is terrible, right? I think everybody, is awed by this just sort of grand up high view, and it's just like so fitting for God, his mountain and what's on top of his mountain, and it's just
that statue had nothing on a mountain.
Yeah.
That earthly statue.
Yeah. And you're awed by it, and Satan saying, I want to be higher than your mountain. I want to be up there. Just seems like.
And he wants us to walk on the high places of the earth.
So the kingdoms of this earth that were man-made, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the feet of iron, it's just like, I'm going to show you a real kingdom with, and kingdoms are based on laws, right? Governments and things like that.
Right.
So the whole world is going to be on an eternal government of God's laws, the 10 Commandments. Awesome.
Wow. This was deep.
Yeah.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. I certainly did. And, just to really get to the bottom. I mean, we're not even scratching the surface, actually, not even the bottom. But yeah, if you guys want to see more of this, read more of this, here's a book that Scott wrote called The Stand. And a lot of this is taken from this book, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll put a link in the description below. If you have not seen the other presentation that Scott gave here on the wedding, you got to see this one to also get a little depth into the connection between Revelation and the wedding and the time that we're living in now. So both those books are available. And if you want to look into this more, we'll put a link in the description below. But thank you so much for coming on and blessing us.
And I think you're gonna make one of these available for anybody who wants to.
That's right. Actually, we're gonna do a giveaway. So Keith, tell us a little bit about the giveaway.
You just need to go to our website. The link will be in the description below, littlelightstudios.tv/free offer. And you can go there and enter to win one of these books.
Yep. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Visit our brothers at schoolforprophets.tv and watch From Babylon to America, which has over 5 million views on YouTube alone, and follow it up with America to Babylon. Check the description below for links to this and more.